Good evening.
Evening, David. Hi, Bill.
Good evening.
Bill, I still don't see Michael in here. Have you heard from him?
I figured he wasn't going to log in until 6:30.
Oh, okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh.
Hi, you must be Michael.
Hello.
Hi, Michael.
How are you?
Okay.
All good here. So now we've got a yeah. Okay. Now let's see. Oh, how's that? Nope. How's that?
Audio's
Any
good.
better?
Audio's good.
Not really.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Let's see if I can turn it on. Oh, there we go. How's that?
Yep, that's better. I muted everyone but you and I.
Okay. So I should press stay muted.
Sorry, I'm still working this out. You should just have one of your devices unmuted. And
Okay. Stay unmuted. Uh-oh. That might have been the wrong device. So, how's that? We good to go?
yep, I think so. I only hear one of you.
Okay. Well, that's good because there is only one of me.
Convenient.
Yeah, yeah. And my wife says the same thing, by the way. Okay. So, do we have our group, or they're assembling, or?
I'll I'll let Bill take over from here. Let me unmute you, Bill. Oh, I can't forcibly unmute you. I can only ask you to unmute yourself.
Now you see if you're in the same room, you can kind of twist his arm.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to turn the radio off too here.
Yeah.
That was Neil Young playing on the radio, who was born just up the road.
Neat. Bill, can you unmute yourself? Ah, there we go. There's spotlight video.
It's asking me to unmute. I should do that, I guess.
No, you're already unmuted.
Oh, okay.
I clicked spotlight video, and that must have prompted
we-
Zoom.
Oh, we've got an echo again.
Yeah. Yeah, only have
Okay.
one of your devices unmuted.
Is that
Okay,
better?
well, yeah, we're good now.
Good. Okay.
Okay, Bill's not unmuting himself. So I'll just give a quick intro. Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is our July monthly meeting. Please bear with us. This is my first time hosting a Zoom meeting. I just created this Zoom account, so I'm kind of new to this, but Michael Fortune is our wonderful presenter. And Michael, I will let you take it from here.
Okay. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background. I'm talking to you from outside of Toronto, Canada. I'm standing in the middle of my workshop, which is about 5,500 square feet. Machine room, sort of that way. This is kind of the bench room area. Just outside is another building that I have my design office in. Now, where we live is in a historic homestead that we bought for $1 Canadian back in about 1982 or so, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was completely uninhabitable and hadn't been lived in since 1966. We spent 20 years rebuilding it and moved here along with moving my business and studio and so on in about 2000. I work all over the world. We're currently, I'm designing and building furniture for Canadian embassies around the world. We've done Berlin, Geneva, The Hague, Algeria, instead of 11 in total. And we're currently working on the embassy in Canberra, Australia. I've been doing this, every time I say this, I shake my head in disbelief. I'm approaching 50 years as a furniture designer and maker. I didn't start out as a chair maker, but one of my clients who was started purchasing my work early on, about 1979, asked me to design a dining room table and chairs for them. And very smart client. They said, what we're asking you to do is really complex, to design a new chair. So you might, in fact, try and design a chair that you can reproduce in variation over the years. And that's essentially exactly what happened. We're approaching, and I'll show you that design, but we're approaching 500 of just that one design. Now, we're talking about chair design construction here. That first chair in 1979, I started in September of 79 and worked solely developing the idea and the process to build the chair right through to the following February. So it was 5 months to resolve that design, and then just enough jigs to fabricate the set of 8. Now, every time we've made a set over the years, we've added to the jigs and so on, just refined the process to take some of the initial labor out. And that means all the joinery, cutting the parts and so on, which in turn leaves me enough time for the fun part, which is hand shaping the chair as it goes together. So it's been great fun, and I've got one in here that's in progress. There's actually another one, and one for my daughter and one for my son to give to them at some point. All right, so what I've got for you here is actually a bit of a menagerie of chairs that we have in our house that I've made. Kind of funny, I use a very specific collection of anthropometric data, which is really the comfort issue for making my chairs, which is quite different from standard chairs that you might purchase. So just as I was kind of getting ready, I thought, I should bring in a standard kind of conventional chair and show you about that chair and where the improvements I've made on the typical dimensions that you find in purchased chairs. And then I started to look around and went, oh, I don't have any. All the chairs in our house I've made. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll go next door and I'll borrow one from one of the neighbors down the road. And I thought, well, here I am going in to borrow one of their chairs because it's kind of ugly and uncomfortable. I thought maybe I shouldn't do that. So we'll just talk about why conventional chairs are uncomfortable is the bigger issue. Now I'm going to be consulting some notes as we go through here. And before I go any further, I want to point out that there is no such thing as a stupid question. So you've got a question, I'll do whatever I can to answer the question, whether it's a joinery issue, a material issue, a design or aesthetic issue. You can ask the price on anything, and I'll give you that as well. And on that note, I want to mention that you remember I talked about making that first set of chairs. Those chairs that took me 5 months to resolve, even the first one, they were $465 each, and that wasn't even real money. It was Canadian money. So in any case, over the years, every time I make them, they get more expensive. So the last one we did in an exotic wood, each chair was a little over $11,000, and that is real money, by the way. So it's kind of backwards to what is typical. The more you make, the cheaper it gets. In this case, it's the more you make, the more expensive it gets. And they are in collections and so on, all over the place. So I'm going to take my iPad here, he says optimistically, and it's not doing what it should. Here we go. Bit of a tour. We'll start over here because it's kind of a good place to start. These are, kind of in a way, a typical design exploration. I'll be showing you my sketchbook in a few minutes. Develop a volume of ideas around a central theme. And then I go to a quarter size model, which I've got right here. And I'm very, very, very careful to work specifically to quarter size. I don't use eighth size because it's too small. Then I don't use half size because it looks like children's furniture. I work quarter size. So, you know, it allows you to do enough detail to sort of understand the shape the way it might be best. To go from there to a full-size mock-up that is just wailed together. Virtually no joinery. Joinery is screws most frequently, and I'm just cutting things and putting them together. But I should have enough structure there so I can actually sit in the chair and see if it's comfortable. And my rationale for the various steps is it takes a while, and you know, whatever it is you're making, if you're selling it, is going to be expensive. So you really want to make sure the direction you're going in is practical. Now, the one I'm actually looking at right here, that silvery stuff, is a piece of wood, square wood, that I rounded over with a router bit and then sprayed it silver to approximate aluminum or stainless steel. Here is the prototype right here, and I always make a prototype, and that's as close as I can get. But there may be some flaws in the wood, or a proportion I'm not quite comfortable with. So rather than going to the step of making a batch of them and at that point going, oh gee, I wish I had changed X, the prototype allows me to make those changes before committing myself. Now over here, well, let's start here. This is what I refer to as the number one chair, and it's not necessarily the first chair, but it's the first kind of serious chair that I made, and that's the one I refer to in I started in 1979. Now here's just to give you a better picture of the chair. There's a poster. These were actually, they were banners. There's a big exhibition in the Capitol, the Museum of Civilization, and this was the poster, the banner hanging from the light standards in the all down the main street in the Capitol. So this one either goes to Jennifer or goes to Peter. All the bent parts you see have all been steam bent. And it's a process that I do here in the workshop, just like turning on the bandsaw or turning on the drill press. Everything's set up and good to go. Now, the way I steam bend wood, I get absolutely perfect results, and each part is identical. And that's important in this case because all the joinery, of course, is done by jigs. And if the bent parts don't fit in the jigs, you're kind of scuppered is what it amounts to. So it is important. And like I said, I've made almost 500 of these using the same jigs. I mentioned 12 to begin with, 12 jigs. But at this point, I think there's 37 or 38 jigs that work in a sequence to do all the joinery and cut the parts out and so on. But all the rest of it, all the rest of the work, I should say, is all done with essentially with hand tools and the scrapers and so on that are made specifically for this chair. Now, variation on this chair is over here. Sorry, it's a bit crowded. One thing that's common to every chair in here, no matter how different it is from the one next door, I am always using exactly the same anthropometric data. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Here's in a way, kind of a take on a Windsor chair. And one of the drawbacks to Windsor chairs is, of course, the back often gets wheelie. And I've been able to avoid that by actually having the back go through the seat into a structural stretcher behind the chair. And then, of course, the other issue with Windsor chairs is often the legs start to display. And there's, a very traditional way of dealing with that. And that is by binding the legs together with wire, which I've done here, just to kind of play with that whole notion. This chair was designed for manufacture in Central America through a program of Greenwood. And I'll say more about that in a minute. The chair we're looking at here, this is the most recent chair, actually just finished recently, and I'm just about to do a set of 8 of these chairs. The back legs are steam bent. The rest of the parts are sawn. The finish that you're looking at here, the wood is white oak, but it's been ebonized with a very specific series of steps involving household black tea, vinegar, and steel wool. And when you do it that way, that's what you get, this really luscious, dense black color. The back and the seat have been coopered. So I'm back has 9 parts. The seat has 11. And I've inlaid a little bit of a dark wood between the coopered segments. The seat, on the other hand, that inlay goes right through the thickness, and that's done on the jointer before the parts go together. So I'll be doing a set of 8. I've got all the parts all stacked up. Blanks, I should say, ready to go through the process. Over here, this is a kind of a nice, simple dining chair, and this is kind of the type of dining chair that I can afford of my own work. What makes it so simple is the lack of joinery. And also the lack of, when you do joinery in chairs, the more joints you have, the more a risk there is of failure. So by steam bending the back legs, and I'll talk more about that, steam bending the seat, I've eliminated a lot of the joinery. The back on some of these chairs is vacuum formed. Some of the chairs are solid wood. Now, an important part of this process for me is making a full-size mock-up, and that's what you're looking at right there. We live in this house that's approaching 200 years old, so it's a very old log and stone building. And when I'm doing prototypes, and these are done in bits of 2x4 and MDF and just whatever I can come up with to create the 3-dimensional image that I'm after. So because there's so many different woods and materials involved, so I don't get visually confused when I'm evaluating the design of the chair, I just kind of paint it is what it comes down to. Because I live in a 200-year-old house, I'll paint it to look like an antique. And so here, by the way, is a good illustration of that. So this is sawn MDF here, sawn out on the bandsaw. This portion in here is sawn out. You can see I've kind of hacked it here to get the material out of the way.
The back legs are cut from pieces of 2x4, and this is probably a piece of curved vacuum formed wood that I've gone ahead and cut to the shape that I'd like to pursue. Now, so the beauty to doing this is it's structural enough to sit in. I can live with it for weeks and so on before I make the decision or start to play with the changes I would like to make. I'll live with it so that, you know, when I start building it, it's exactly what I've got in mind. Over here, this is not my chair. We have interns that come in from around the world, and this intern was from New Zealand, and she was in here March through August of last year. So this is a prototype that Lou made, and it's just too difficult to get it back to New Zealand, so she left it here. Now over here, you know, we haven't got into it yet, but you know, chairs come in are made for different reasons, and one reason is you want something that's comfortable to sit on, and that might be a high price chair, it might be a low price chair, or it might be chair as a form statement. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. This actually isn't even a chair. This is the image of a chair, but it's meant to be a shelf. So it's very narrow. It's about 4 or 5 inches deep. And so I'm playing with perspective here. And there's actually a hole underneath, right underneath here. And that allows me to hang the chair on the wall. So, you know, when you're approaching the door and you've got a coffee cup in one hand and you know, you're something else in the other hand, you've got to deal with the doorknob. So I can put whatever it is to get a hand free, I can put it on my shelf. Here, kind of a funny story. I was asked to go in an exhibition in a gallery, and before it opened, they changed curators. And the curator coming in absolutely hated craft in any medium, in any variation. So she moved the exhibition from the gallery to a hallway. And so at that point, you know, what I was going to make is not going to fit in a hallway. So I made this chair that was only 4 or 5 inches deep. And the only piece that sold from the exhibition was exactly that chair, in this case in solid cherry. Next door is another chair here. It's got, you know, in a way, kind of a nice simple chair to make. And somewhere around here, here it is right here. There's plans to do a variation of this chair from fine woodworking. So it does make a really nice contemporary dining chair, kitchen chair, and so on. Then there's everything you need to know to make one of those chairs from the fine woodworking plants. Now you'd have to find out if they're still available. And I also have to point out there's everything you need to know, but some of it's not actually right. You know, they publish these things without passing them by the designers, in this case me. And so there's a few errors that have been made that people often call me, and we can correct them over the phone or by FaceTime or Skype. Here, by the way, is a chair that you may have remember seeing in fine wood. It's an outdoor garden chair and very, very comfortable, easy to get in and out of, unlike a conventional Adirondack chair. I've taught that class at the Mark Adams School in just outside of Indianapolis 3 or 4 times. The classes are typically full, which is either 16 or 18 people. And at the end of the week, everybody walks away with one of the chairs and an ottoman. Maybe there's somebody in your group that has actually done that. Okay, so that's a bit of a tour of the various chairs in here. The information, as I mentioned, is identical, and you hopefully have received that information on the anthropometrics of chairs. And I'm desperately trying to find it myself, so I can point it out. That's not it. Oh, yeah. In any case, there's a line drawing that you have been, here it is right here, that you've been sent that looks like this. And if you could, if the individuals can pick this out from the things that they've been sent, it would be most helpful, because we're going to talk about comfort issues for dining and desk chairs. Now, I mentioned, I started a new chair in 1979. I spent some of that time doing a survey of chairs I found all over, whether they were in restaurants or in private residences and so on. And I looked at, I asked people that were sitting in the chairs and what they thought about that chair they were sitting in. And the response was kind of universal. And it had to do with women or people that were just shorter in general found that the seats were too high. That when they were sitting down, their feet were kind of dangling a bit, or they had to really put their toes on the ground without their heel to touch the ground. Other people, it could be a continuation of the discussion. They said, well, this chair, the back is too upright. I'm not comfortable after 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes at the most. I feel like I really have to get up and walk around. And now that we're talking about that when I'm sitting down, the chair seat is flat, and I kind of slide out. So I'm taking notes on this, and I'm running around. Actually, I've got one in my tool cabinet. I've got an inclometer, which sounds really complex, but it's a little plastic thing with a weight in it, and it will measure angles. And what I discovered was that in most commercial dining chairs, that the seat was typically flat. The back ranged from relative to the seat anywhere from 95 to maybe 100 degrees, somewhere in that neighborhood. And of course, the seat was always taller. So with that information, I started to develop my own testing apparatus, and I believe you've been given a handout, and that looks like this right here. And so I cobbled this thing out of together out of plywood, made it adjustable where it had to be adjustable, so I could develop my own anthropometric data. And what came out of all that effort was that the seat should be sort of 16 and a half, maybe 17 at the most. So that allows most people to put their feet flat on the floor. It also allows tall people to simply put their legs out. The seat seemed to be much better when it was inclined backwards about 5 degrees. And then the big discovery really had to do with the back angle. What I found was in every chair that I've made since, the back angle, depending on the design, is anywhere from 108 to 113 degrees. And the big thing there, of course, is that you incline the back a little bit more, and it actually cradles your upper body weight and takes some of the pressure off your spine. All right, that's important. Now, I've mentioned 113 degrees. Soon as you go past that, 115, 118, and so on, then that puts your head in an uncomfortable position. Now, this has worked for me because the people that are buying my chairs, they typically entertain a lot. And at that point, they may not start dinner until 9 o'clock, 9:30 or later. And they may not finish dinner until midnight or 1 o'clock or later in the morning. And so the chairs that they're sitting in that I've designed and made for them are comfortable for that length of time. And so, you know, it just makes sense when you look at you know, creating a comfortable chair from that perspective. And the other thing, of course, is chairs that are manufactured. And you know, in a way, this is kind of a very similar in a way, because it's, you know, like I said, it's a simpler chair. This back leg is often much straighter, and the reason it's much straighter is they really don't want to take a wide piece of wood and cut the back leg out of it, because it's just too darn wasteful. And on an inexpensive chair, that's you know, kind of not really a solution, is what it comes down to. So, you know, there's a comfort issue, and then there's a material issue. That inexpensive chairs, you know, you've got that factor to accommodate as well. You know, I was originally trained as an industrial commercial furniture designer. So I'm very familiar with that type of term of reference. You know, it has to be simple, and it has to be very efficient from a material perspective. But as a furniture designer and maker, then I can step outside of that easily. And in fact, I'm kind of obligated to step outside of that to make chairs that are comfortable and in fact more unique. So now, so I'm just going to make sure I'm covering my steps here. So I'm going to flip to my sheet. So my sequence that I've talked about so far is thumbnail sketches. And I'm going to show you a few right here. One thing I do a lot of is sketching. And just very briefly, I'm, you know, not slamming by any means digitally done drawing on, but it's just not something that I'm comfortable with from a couple of different perspectives. What I am comfortable with is a really cheap tracing paper that's transparent or semi-transparent, and a 6B pencil. And a 6B pencil floats across your page like it's greased. So I'm not using an HB, which is a standard pencil. 6Bs, the lead is so soft, it will not allow you to get bogged down in detail when you're generating design ideas. So these are sort of ideas that I started to play with when I was developing that chair there with the Cooper seat and back. Some of the idea for that chair actually originated when I was doing an artist in residency in New Zealand this past January through to March at the Center for Fine Woodworking in Nelson, New Zealand. Incredible experience, and I've done it before, and I'll do it again. It's an absolutely glorious country and an amazing school in Nelson, which is in the North Shore of the South Island. But where I was staying, there were these little tiny birds called fantails. And I really like the shape of the tail on the, sorry, it's an air compressor. The tail on this bird stuck virtually up in the air and did this beautiful, beautiful fan. So I started to generate ideas based on the shape of the bird feathers. So I did page after page, and at one point I started to sort of develop a clearer picture of where I wanted to go, and it's in here somewhere, like so. But you know, I'm kind of drawing to scale, but it is important to draw to actual scale. It's too easy to develop an idea that you fall in love with, but when you start putting actual dimension to it, you can't get there from here. So I'm always very careful to go to scale, and that's this piece of paper here. That's what this is all about. I can take my tracing paper and I can put it right over top, and I can start to draw ideas right over top of this. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. But in any case, this is another chair. We're going to talk about this in a minute. Right over top of this sheet right here. And in fact, this box up here, that is a perspective scaled box. So I can take my tracing paper, lay it over top, and start drawing my chair idea as I've done here. If I had a light table, we could look through this piece of paper to the drawing below. Now, you've been given one of these, and there is one incredibly important detail that you've got to remember when you're using this, and it's this, and it's pointed out right here. It says dimensions that you see all over this thing are at the center line of the chair. So that line right there is not the edge of the chair. It is actually the center line of the chair. The back leg could be over here somewhere, as it is on a lot of these chairs. But that right there is the center line. The depth of the chair seat here. There's the numbers that seem to work to make a comfortable chair, and there's the 5-degree incline. Here, these are kind of important details when you're designing chairs, and that is that when you sit down, the chair forward, because the front legs are set back too far. And alternately, if you set the front legs out too far, as you approach the chair to sit down, you're going to trip over the legs. Now back here, here's the back of the chair up here. The typical chair is somewhere 32, 33, 34 inches tall. And if you drop a line down here, you've got a zone, if you will, too far forward. And when you sit down, the chair is inclined to tip back. And if you back leg is too far back, again, it's a bit of a tripping hazard. And if you're doing dining chairs and they're in a dining room and there isn't lots of room to get around them, to sit on the other side of the table, then at that point you're going to bump into the back legs. Okay, so that's where a lot of these ideas come from, just simply playing in my sketchbook. So we're going to walk over here in a minute. Here's the original doodle done on my sheet here on tracing paper for that chair, and you can see the back is quite different here to what I actually ended up with. And the reason that I don't use computer-aided drawing is it can be too close to reality, is what it amounts to. And I kind of like the whole notion of doing a pencil drawing, and then you get to discover that piece as the design unfolds. And the other issue is, of course, I'm doing it for, these are all commissioned chairs. I really don't want to show someone a perfect illustration of something only to discover that in 3D, when you're actually sitting on the floor in front of you, or you're about to sit in it, that it doesn't, those issues don't match, that it's structurally unsound, or it's uncomfortable, and so on. It looks great on the computer-aided drawing, but maybe not so good in reality. So pencil renderings, in my opinion, give me some fuzziness, some essentially some wiggle room as I'm developing the chair. I'm not, fixated on one shape. It allows for lots of interpretation, really, as I go through the process. I forgot to mention at the start, and I'll do it now. The chairs, as we know them, are about 5, maybe 6,000 years old, and that there is a chair, and it's called the Klizmos chair, and if I'm not mistaken, it's I wrote it down, Klizmos. And it was found in Mesopotamia. When I say found, no one's actually found a chair. They've only been able to see what one looks like, because it's there's illustrations on ceramic ware that has survived. But by the nature of the shape and so on, there's great speculation by scholars and so on to suggest that those shapes could really only have been done by taking parts cut from trees to give them the exaggerated chairs, the shapes that you see in the Klizmos chair. So that, and you still see that chair. You go to any of the interior design magazines or Architectural Digest and so on, that Google Klizmos chair, and you'll see illustrations of the original, and then you will see that shape pop up in variation in all of the design magazines. Now, as time progressed, not everyone could afford chairs of that nature, of course. So, people got into making simpler chairs, and, the original chair, Windsor chairs and so on. The original chairs were done by chair bodgers that were essentially itinerant chair makers. And they would go around and make chairs from village to village. And, as our various cultures became more successful, chairs became more complex. And what we often regard as an incredibly beautiful chair was designed in the 17th or 18th century. And today, if you see a meeting of world leaders, whoever they might be, and they're in some sort of meeting area, chances are they're sitting in a variation of that chair, whether it's a Chippendale, whether it's an American Federal chair, French style, or whatever it is. They're all kind of, that's people. You ask people to draw a chair, that's what they're going to draw, even if it's a bad drawing. You can, it's sort of the image of chair that's been burned into our consciousness. The wrinkle to that, and it is a huge wrinkle today, and that is this. Those chairs done in the late 1600s, 17 and 1800s and onward, they were designed to be sit in a very specific way. It was considered slovenly to actually lean against the back of the chair. All right. So you see all these incredible backs of sawn filigree and so on, and you think, boy, that looks fragile. Well, it is. And those original chairs have survived because they were essentially not to be leaned against. So, but time has progressed, and now you have young people, or maybe you do it in your own house. You sit in a chair and you tilt on the back legs. That stresses on a conventional chair with the side rail going into the back leg, stresses that joint like you can't possibly imagine. And it gets worse. So you sit in the chair, you lean back on the chair vigorously to lift the front legs up off the ground. So, you're in a more comfortable position because the back is now angled where it wasn't before, and the seat is now angled. All right. So you sit there for a few minutes and then you stand up, and your full body weight slams down the front legs onto the floor, and that joint at the back tends to eventually walk out of the joint. So I put together a sort of an example, if you will, here of what I'm talking about, and it's this. Now, I think I need two hands for this, so I'm going to put this on my tripod here. Oops. Hopefully this is going to work. Tell me if I am obscuring the view of what's going on. I'll try not to. But in any case, this is what I'm talking about right here. So you've got a back leg here. You can imagine this is an American Federal style back leg. You've got a seat frame member here that's mortise and tenon into the back here, and you've got a mortise and tenon joint up in this area here. Okay, so what happens when you lean back in that chair? You see what's going on here? The joint opens here and it opens down here. If you're doing this, it's happening, all right? And then what happens when you allow the chair to fall forward as you stand up, the front leg hits the ground, and then the joints open in the opposite direction here. So you do this enough, and you can see where that chair is
definitely going to fail. But there's fortunately a nice, easy solution, and it's in a way a design or even an engineering solution, and that's this. You triangulate that. You triangulate this joint right here. All right, you can triangulate it down here. You can triangulate it here. You can triangulate it up here if you wish to strengthen this intersection right here. So a nice illustration. I sacrificed some elastic and a pair of my underwear to show you how to do this. All right. So if we look at this chair here, it doesn't look like it, but it's triangulated. So what we've got is a structural triangle right in this area right here. All right. So although that chair is very slender, it's actually quite strong. And having made 500 of them with no casualties, that structural triangle is doing the job. Now, from the front view, chairs are subject to tremendous strain when you're sitting down. A 200-pound person at the point of impact might be 250, 300, and more, depending on the velocity of the point of impact. But in any case, so that's where most of the engineering solution really has to come forward. Side to side, not so much. I mean, you know, you just can't have anything too simple there, of course. These chairs are done with stepped mortise and tenons, and you can see, if you can, and I don't. Yeah, okay. That's a stepped mortise and tenon. What you see is a wedged small tenon, but buried in there is a very large stub tenon. So the large stub tenon is carrying the weight, and the through slender wedge tenon, which has been dovetailed, that is holding the joint in place. Big tenon's carrying the weight. Small tenon is locking it together. So that way I can get away with a relatively small cross section here, which is just a smidge under 3 inches. Same joint back in here, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to be right back. I've got what that looks like right here. Right here is the joint I've been talking about. So that is the side rail on that chair with the Coopered seat and back and the back black legs. The big tenon is carrying the weight. This small tenon will be sawn down. The mortise will dovetailed open, and I'll drop in some wedges. So short of catastrophic collapse or failure, that joint is not coming apart. I'm going to get into joinery in a few minutes. Does anyone have questions so far?
Everyone is free to unmute yourselves if you guys have questions, or if you can't figure out how to unmute, feel free to ask it in the chat and I will ask verbally for you.
Well, you guys are an easy group so far. We're going to do a bit of a tour here of some books and so on that I've collected over the years. Now, chairs are sort of an intriguing topic, is what it comes down to. There's if you look at furniture, cabinets, and tables, and so on, there are probably way more books devoted to chairs than any other piece of furniture, and it's right across the board. Chairs as sculpture, chairs as production items. There's a huge number of books devoted to that. There's fabulous books devoted to studio furniture books, studio chair books, and so on. And I'm just going to wander through some of the books that over the years I found to be quite intriguing. And one of the first books I want to point out is this. I have to get in there somehow. I can take a photograph of these books, so you can pick up the titles if you want to search them on Amazon. This is an intriguing book. It's a British campaign furniture. And this has had an incredible effect on the history of furniture from this perspective. Now, after the grand armies of Europe back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, as they swept across Europe, the French army, the British army, Prussian, and so on. It was a war of movement and so on. And the officer class, of course, needed tables and chairs and beds and cabinets and so on. And there was a lot of furniture design specifically for that purpose. The furniture had to either come apart or nest or stack or whatever, so they could be put in a wagon and off they would go to the new site. So this is a fabulous book that illustrates a number of variations of chairs, cabinets, and so on that were designed to be essentially taken apart. And a common term for that is furniture that's done in an RTA manner, which is ready to assemble. So in any case, so this picture this will get off to 1800. Fast forward to the Second World War. Europe is devastated. Cities have been vaporized. War's over. Europe is trying to rebuild. The Scandinavian countries to the north, on the other hand, were largely untouched. Sweden, Finland. Finland was actually involved in the war, as was Norway, but not so much. But they still were looking at supporting their populace through something other than agriculture. At the time, Sweden was largely an agricultural country, supported its inhabitants through agriculture. But they could see into the future that they couldn't continue doing that, and that perhaps there was an opportunity here to help Europe rebuild. Sweden in particular had quite an incredible handcraft, and you can't call it industry, but handcraft culture. But it was all very conventional. Cabinets built, so they were built you know, to withstand attack. I'm just kidding. But, you know, there was nothing RTA ready to assemble about them. They're put together, glued, and mortise and tenon, and the rest of it. But the government at the time said, well, look at, you know, we've got this skill set, designers of the day, to design furniture that could be manufactured in Sweden, but then in turn delivered to Europe and put together there. So the designers of the day started to look through the history of furniture, and voila, came up with campaign furniture from the Napoleonic War era. And if you look at early Scandinavian style furniture, and then look at this book on British campaign furniture, you'll see some amazing similarities. And the point I'm making there, of course, is that, you know, that wasn't a eureka moment. Oh, let's design ready to assemble furniture. It's a case of going back through the history of furniture and looking for things that can be adapted and altered and so on to suit in this case, contemporary purpose. So that's kind of fun in terms of just looking for sources of ideas, is to look back through the history of furniture. You take a look at this, and then you look at what's generally regarded as the best furniture or chair designer to date is Hans Wegner. And this is a book on his furniture, which is quite extensive. This is the peacock chair here. And I'm just going to do this very briefly. Wagner was building furniture outside of Denmark, outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. And, you know, he was servicing kind of a local need for well-made furniture. And I'm not entirely certain of the year. It might be 1961. I'm sure somebody there will know. There's the first televised debate between Nixon and Kennedy. And it was a big deal to televise the debate, first one ever. And they had banks of people at telephones ready to answer questions. So went ahead, and you know, the phones are manned, and everybody's good to go. The most frequently asked question was, where did they get the chairs that they were sitting in? And that singular event pretty much launched the Scandinavian furniture movement back in the early 60s. So thank you very much, Hans for doing that. Now, this is, of course, if you're you know, a fan of contemporary furniture magazines and so on, these are design magazines. That whole Scandinavian furniture movement, you know, has come back like a tidal wave, to say the least. When I was a design student back in the I guess early 70s, we were rebelling against the Scandinavian style, is what it really came down to. But obviously, you can tell who won. Those pesky Scandinavians, to be sure. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but Hans Wegner has designed hundreds and hundreds of chairs. And what we're looking at here is the top of one of the wishbone chairs. But what I'm going to ask you to look at is up here. And there's got to be 30, 40, 50 quarter-size models. And so doing quarter-size models is, in fact, an incredibly important step in the design sequence of designing chairs. Ew. On the other page, right over here, is that chair I'm referring to, right here. Now, that is referred to as the chair, and it's regarded as the most beautiful chair that's been made to date. So you can tell by the sheer volume. Here's a book of 1,000 chairs. Chairs by Frank Lloyd Wright. If you're kind of interested in this topic, this is definitely a book that you would want. I mean, and it goes right across the gamut. This might be a chair by Salvador Dali, by the way, by the looks of it. So in any case, chairs by a Finnish designer, Alvaro Aalto. And you can certainly see those. Actually, you can see those. I saw one recently in Walmart, done in a different way than this one was done, but it was in wood, so it wasn't an injection molded variation. It was actually a wood small stool, and it was like 1995 or something. Probably made in an East Bloc country, but absolutely fabulous view of chairs over the ages. And it wouldn't surprise me if they illustrate the first chair, which is that Klismos chair that I've referred to. Now there's 1,000 chairs. Here's 500 chairs. Now this is published by Lark Publishing, and this is, I'm going to say recent, which means like 10 years ago or something of that nature. And this is a survey of chairs. Most of the makers here are American, a few Canadians, and a few people from around the world. But look at the variation of ideas surrounding chairs. And of course, there's a very, very, very famous rocking chair by Sam Maloof included in this book. There's work by Wendell Castle, David Uphill Brown. Oh, work by Michael Fortune in here as well. So a very worthwhile book to purchase on chairs. Over here, there is, in terms of volume again, here is 397 chairs. So you can see just, the number of people that are tinkering with the idea of, there's a three-legged chair, chair. Oh, this is designed by one of my industrial design teachers when I was in art school, Philip Salmon. So that's a kind of fun to open to that page. I'm sure some various people will be interested in arts and crafts furniture. Here's a book of the work of Charles Rolfe. Pretty elaborate work. Charles Rennie Mackintosh, an incredible book. I was in teaching in Edinburgh, Scotland last November, and had a chance to go to Glasgow, which I jumped at, and went through the various museums and installations of Charles Rennie Mackintosh's work. And you can almost tell that there was correspondence between Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Frank Lloyd Wright, as well as Joseph Hoffman, who was a furniture designer in Germany. And so you can see, in a way, kind of a similarity of the aesthetic of the day, which in turn was responding, perhaps even against, the furniture that was much more popular, which is the hugely upholstered furniture with incredibly elaborate carved arms and legs. This furniture was very, as well as Frank Lloyd Wright's, was very spare in terms of the shape and so on. But look how uncomfortable that chair would be as we would interpret the chair today. You'd sit in that and you'd be up and out of there in 10 or 15 minutes, just through the nature of the seat being flat and the back being very close to vertical. Now, kind of a fun thing is this. Now, this is done sort of early 1900s, 1905, 1910, that sort of neighborhood, before the Second World War. So that gives you the time frame for this particular aesthetic. Now, if anybody's a Star Trek fan, think of when the crew is sitting around the dining table on a Starship Enterprise in the 24th century, if I'm not mistaken. Think of the chairs that they are sitting in the 24th century. Chairs by Charles Rennie Mackintosh, designed in 1905. Quite amazing. So he was reacting to the kind of overstuffed furniture of the day. Now, this is one of my favorite books of all time. This is a style of furniture called the Biedermeier style that was popular in Europe, sort of 1800, 1810, that sort of neighborhood. And this was largely a style developed in Northern Europe. Belgium, Holland, and so on had become incredible world traders. And there is a class of people that were making bags of money, buying and having elaborate homes built, and then having furniture designed specifically for this new lifestyle. And there is the name of that style of furniture. Now, if you wander through here, you'll see amazing things. And a lot of the things you see are interpreted today. So this chair here, pick a number, 1805. You'd have to look hard to find something more contemporary looking. There's a bed. I'm kind of wandering through this book looking for one of my favorite benches. Oh, look at this right here. The back on that chair is absolutely fabulous. And if I am not mistaken, in page 134, or close to it, there's 134, there is a double page spread of, look at here, like, wow, 1804. Is that amazing or what? Look at the fluidity of those curves. Look at that intersection right here of this line coming up and coming into the back leg. And then think of some of the chairs I just showed you, and something we'll see in a few minutes. So it's pretty obvious that there's where that inspiration came from. So you wander through this book, and there's, it's a treasure trove of shapes that one can play with, adapt, and so on. Really nice hand illustrations. And no matter how, usually this just opens, when I open a book, it opens to the page I'm looking for, but it's not going to do it this time. Wow. Just amazing things. So if you're not familiar with Biedermeier, that is certainly something that you'd want to look into. This is a phenomena of epic proportions, and that's the work of Michael Thonet. And I'm just going to do this really quickly. Thonet's furniture at the sort of 1870, 1880, 1890 was the most popular furniture, inexpensive furniture available in Europe, bar none. Thonet and Company at the turn of that century, that one company was making 2 million pieces of furniture a year. There were other companies that had taken, this is the Thonet catalog, by the way, that had taken this catalog and crossed out Thonet's name and put their own name up here, Cohen and Cohen and so on. They were making 2 million pieces of furniture a year. And guess what? All this furniture is all been steam bent. So, which, Aboriginals, people around the world have been bending wood, but it was actually Michael Thonet who industrialized the process in, I think it was 1862, if I'm not mistaken. So, you can look through this and go, oh, wow, I struggle to bend a one little piece of wood, but in fact, there's a method of bending wood using Thonet's approach, which I'm using here for the bent work that I do. I'm just doing my own variation of the process and of course of the design. Okay, so I'm going to motor on here and we're going to talk about the process of actually making chairs. Now the not the wrinkle, but my demo thing just fell over. I guess the underwear elastic finally gave out. That happens. All right. Now, I use a very specific method, bit unusual for making things that are not square, and that's often chairs. The seat comes in at angles, the back legs are different shapes coming in at angles and so on. Everything is coming in odd relationships. But what you still have to do, of course, is figure out the joinery, what those angles actually are. And it's not sort of getting close. It's got to be right bang on the money to make sure your tenon comes into the mortise in exactly the right angle. So what I use in this case is what I refer to as a endoskeleton. So I've got a platform here that sits on, that's stable, and I've gridded out the platform, and I've made a structure here that works off the center line that you will see running up here. So there's a center line running along here. This is just sort of placed on here. And you can see its center line runs right up here, comes across the top, and then back down the front. And what that allows me to do is measure the angle of those parts. And because I'm making these chairs, I can remember what that angle is. If this is the center line here, like so, that part comes off at exactly 21 degrees off the center line. Now, as I'm making my chair, if I measured that at 21, and then I kind of futzed around and did the other one, and thought, oh no, that one isn't 21, it's 23, then things get complicated really fast.
So what I'm invariably doing when I'm designing chairs is finding a center line here that runs right up around the piece, and then only ever measuring one side. So if it's 21 degrees on this side, it's exactly 21 degrees on this side. And my legs come down and they intersect the grid in the same place. I'll attach little shapes like so that will come in here like this. And I'll put one in exactly the same relationship. I'll draw lines down to here and shoot it back here. So one isn't going on in this direction and the other one's going on like that. Everything is symmetrical right off the center line. So what all that means is this. So I started out with a big block of, in this case, white oak. Where'd this come from? Probably up here. So in any case, I've been able to find my joinery and so on. And we're going to talk about that joinery in a second. But what it does allow me to do is determine exactly where that joint is and exactly how that joint there relates to the center line of the chair here. So when I'm doing the other side, the joints are all coming in at the appropriate angle. So with this thing, at one point, all the joinery has been cut here, here, and here. And then that allows me to put my patterns on and start bandsawing my shape. And I've got written instructions here, by the way, right on the patterns which are made in masonite. So this is a left and a right, like so. So that would lay on here like so. I tilt the bandsaw to whatever it says here, and make my sweeping cut through here. So I'm keeping all my my offcuts. Here's the pattern for the front leg. Actually, here's the front leg here. And this, by the way, is how I'm doing a joinery like that, which is a bit unusual. So here's my front leg coming up here. Here's the pattern right here. So that sits on here like so. All right. So and you can see my line up here. That's the miter. But before anything is cut out, I'm mortising very deeply down into here like so. And then where that intersects the front leg, that is mortised into here very deeply as well. And so what I'm doing here is making these right angled tenons out of Baltic birch. It's 13 ply Baltic birch, and dropping that in like so. These are two dissimilar parts, by the way, but just gives you the general idea to create that intersection at the miter at the front leg. So the end of that is without that squaring jig, chances are this chair would be kind of tilting in the wind in some way. Both sides wouldn't be the same, and so there would be a huge amount of hand fitting the individual parts, and not something I want to pursue. When doing it this way, it gives you the result bang on from square one. It does involve building some jigs and so on, which I know I'm going to reuse for doing sets of these chairs in the future. That's one thing about chairs. You're often kind of rarely doing one. You're often doing a number of them, and at that point, it might mean that you get into making some jigs
you wanted to, or not. So this is what I refer to as an endoskeleton. And over here, this chair is using both an endoskeleton and an exoskeleton around the back. And this whole thing works off of the center line that I hope you can see right here. So it lines up with the center line of the Coopered back here. This is my mock-up, by the way. And here's the center line down here. So the whole chair isn't going together in some weird tilt. It's going together right off the center line. And that Biedermeier chair I referred to, that I blathered on about how beautiful it was. There's the same intersection right there. So I'm not inventing that relationship of parts at all. It's just simply a variation, and using my own joinery techniques and so on. But it, is in a way kind of similar relationship between the curved seat frame and the back legs. Just beyond that, everything else is quite different. Now, all this joinery is done. I do own a domino. I don't use it that much because it works great. It's a spectacular tool for square. Not so good for working with curves and unusual shapes. So we're going on a bit of a walking tour here. I'm going to turn the lights on in the machine room. So this is my machine room. There's a thickness sander, a 4x8 veneer press, 5 different thickness planers, a big jointer. There's a total of 10 bandsaws in this workshop. And anything that you see anything that you've seen so far, the most frequently used machine is actually that little green one there. It's a really old, I bought it in '74, 15-inch general bandsaw. This is the most recent purchase here. It's a 14-inch Rikon. And then there's the big one at the back is a Centauro, an Italian-made bandsaw. And there's another one further back there, which is a 12-inch bandsaw I bought off somebody's front yard. And as it turns out, it was made just after the Second World War. But the reason that I brought you into the machine room is joinery. So what you're looking at here is a machine called a panto router. And the joinery that I've referred to is done on this machine. And if I can get a little closer here, perhaps. This is the setup here to do the mortise right here. And then you pull this stylus out. It goes around the pattern here to cut the tenon. So that would do the small through mortise and tenon. This one does the larger mortise and tenon portion of the joint that actually carries the weight. So this moves back and forth like so. This can be positioned up and down here to locate your joint. The table on this tilts as well, so you can do left and right compound joints off this machine. Hopefully you can understand my Canadian, but what I'm saying is panto router. There's the sign up at the top. This was the first one I bought here, and they made just amazing improvements to the machine. And the second one, we use all the time. Now, interestingly enough, and this is a piece of machinery used in the Second World War to route out the trigger mechanism on gun stocks. And it's a mortise machine and a glorious piece of equipment. And you'll notice the height of the table, and it's about the same height as I put the panto router on. So as I'm using any of the machinery, I'm in a nice, comfortable position. Having been doing this for approaching 50 years, I'm well on my way. I've been standing up the entire time, and I've got absolutely no back, leg, ankle, hip issues because I'm working on a wooden floor, and I'm always working at a comfortable height. My workbench is just a smidge under 40 inches tall, which in some cases is unusual. Okay, we're back into the bench room. Now, one of the things I want to point out is doing chairs, working on often unusual shapes, and the tools that we typically use, workbenches and so on, really do not hold unusual shapes well. And so, in order to do that, salvage this piece of something. When I moved into an old warehouse years ago, this was kind of chucked in the corner, and I asked the landlord if I could have it. He said, "Sure, drag it out." And this is an air-operated device. Hopefully you can see what I'm swiveling around there, like so. So you step on the pedal. And now, as I'm doing my handwork around each of the joints, it's in exactly the, a nice, comfortable position for me to get that work done. I'm in some cases routing some of the waste away. I'm using an air-operated die grinder to work close, but then the finish work is often done with small rasps and rifflers and so on. It's kind of a labor-intensive process. So over the years, I've kind of spent a fair amount of time making sure that I'm working efficiently by trying one tool, discarding it, trying another one, until I find the right mix of tools for this kind of work. Now, if you don't have one of those, then here is the next best thing. And we have a couple of these in my shop here. These are gun stock devices. And these jaws swivel like so. So that will take shapes of kind of any shape is what it amounts to. And this surface here, the material, I have no idea what it is, like no idea, but it sticks to wood, or I shouldn't say sticks, it grips wood like I've never seen anything do a job that well. So we can take unusual shapes. This piece is curved and tapered, and that is in there now. And not only that, it's not that expensive. These come from Woodcraft or Rockler. They come on sale every once in a while for about 110 bucks, and we have a number of them. You can see pattern makers vices. There's one on my bench here. So when you're working with unusual shapes, you've got to make sure your effort is not wasted chasing the parts around your bench, because inevitably they're going to skate off the bench onto the floor and possibly damage what you're working on. The pile of things that I'm looking at here is those are steam bent parts, and they are part of the back legs for this of the chairs I'm just about to make. So questions of any sort? Design, construction, any structural issues, any structural questions?
Hello, Michael. My name is Dan, and I have a question. When you're
Okay, shoot.
when you're going through your design concepts
Yeah,
and you're taking into consideration how you're going to perhaps what fabrication processes you're going to use, could you address your thought process on steam bending versus bent bent lamination?
sure. I haven't mentioned it, and I should, that when I'm designing anything, whether it's a chair, or table, you name it, I'm not designing to what I know. I'm designing to what I would like to know. So having done this for so many years, this is has remained the most exhilarating pursuit that I could ever imagine, because I'm never getting bored, because everything I'm working on, some element of it is new. But to answer your question specifically, a lot of what I do involves hand shaping and so on. And when you're working with laminated sections, you're often cutting through glue lines and so on. And if you're cutting through a glue line in a very slow manner, that glue line might be 1/1000th of an inch thick. But when you go through that glue line very slowly, that glue line might be maybe 1/8 of an inch wide. And that the finish will not stick to that exposed glue line in the same way it does as the surrounding wood fiber. Now, there's some ways around that in terms of how you shape and so on. But what I'm getting around to saying is I am totally and completely set up to a steam bend. So I can turn on my steamer, like turning on the table saw, the dreaded table saw. I should have said the friendly, pleasant, and versatile bandsaw. I'm joking. That was a joke. Yeah. Okay. So in any case, so I naturally, if I'm doing curves, I naturally lean to the steam bent curves and arcs and so on, with the exception that if I'm working in exotic woods, we do an awful lot of work in Macassar ebony and so on. You cannot steam bend that. It has to be laminated. So, I'm very careful to keep all my grain matched and so on, and use cross-sectional shapes that really avoid that slow arc through a glue line. And then, of course, the other issue is when you steam bend a piece of wood, you do it the way I would suggest, then the parts come off exactly the same from one to the next. And that's important because, of course, a lot of my joinery is done in jigs. And if they don't fit, the parts don't fit in the jigs, the joints aren't in the right place. Is that an adequate answer?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Where I am set up for both. My bandsaws, are set up in a very specific way, which allows us to do straight laminations, tapered laminations, perfectly every time. We're also set up to vacuum form. So they're, one of the this workshop kind of does everything, is what it amounts to, and that's another reason why I enjoy it so much.
Michael,
my
name is Bill. Did I see a shaper in your machine room?
Right there. Yeah.
And do you use custom knives for that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I have custom knives ground. I can send a drawing off and they send me the knives back. Right now, there's a pattern head on it, 85 millimeter diameter head, 50 millimeters tall, 50 millimeters, about 2 inches. And so rather than do that on a router table, we'll use the shaper. But right behind me, there are two routers set up. So, you know, it just depends on the scale of the size of what I'm doing is what it comes down to.
A different type of question.
Yeah.
I'm starting a project to build an Adirondack chair.
Yeah.
Is there a way to modify that design so that it's easier to get in and out of?
Yeah, there is. The angle of the seat is too severe, and it's essentially too low, is what it amounts to. And then the third thing is the front of the chair often rolls over too far, so you can't put your feet underneath to lift your body weight. The sort of Adirondack light chair that I've done is here. Like so. So seat's taller. It doesn't fall away as fast, and it's also curved in the right direction. And those plans are available from Fine Woodworking.
Thank you.
You can see, if you go to my website, which is just michaelfortune.com, you'll see that chair with a matching ottoman. And I've taught that class, I think, 3 times at the Mark Adams School. And, you know, if there's 18 students in the class, everybody leaves with the finished chair and the finished ottoman. Now, they wouldn't be applying the finish, but the construction is done. The arms on that, that's a mahogany chair in the picture, and the arms are in fact laminated.
Michael,
Yeah.
this is Tom Tupper. I took your garden chair class at Mark Adams
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I did a program on it at our guild meeting about
yeah.
a year ago.
Yeah. Oh, good.
But we have 2 of those made, and
Yeah.
anybody who's interested in seeing it, or I have all the plans in the video.
Oh, good. Good.
Make them available to them.
Yeah. Do you have the paper plans?
I do.
Oh, good for you, because they're no longer doing them. They're selling digital plans. And the number of emails, phone calls I get from people that have bought the digital plans, you know, kind of tearing their hair out, you really want the paper plans. Oh, great. If I probably saw more of you, I would probably recognize you from that class. Yeah. Any other questions? Now, have you been back to, you said Tom, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you been back to Mark's?
No, that's the last class I took over there.
Right, right. Okay. Now, how far would that be from St. Louis?
Oh, that's about 250 miles.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's a 14-hour drive for me.
Yeah. Well, you remember my wife Leslie and I took that class together with you, and we each made the chair.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. Right, right, right. All right. Okay. Thank you for spurring my my memory.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, good. So if anybody's got questions, I'm happy to do what I can.
I do. Michael, this is
Yeah.
Vicky, and
Oh,
I have a,
Vicky, this is not good.
Yes.
Vicky, are you talking to me from somewhere sun and palm trees?
oh, yes, and
Wow.
I'll tell you what, I have a non-technical question,
Okay, sure.
and that
sure.
is, I want to know, what kind of chair do you sit in at the end of the day to rest up?
Gee, well, to tell you the truth, that the garden chair we were just talking about, that is a comfortable chair. I've been known to have more than one nap in that chair with the ottoman. It's quite comfortable. Dining chairs wise, what we have around our dining room table is all the various prototypes I've made, which is kind of fun because when we have a big dinner party, people often get into a musical chairs kind of thing to see what the other chairs are like in terms of comfort. So that's great fun. And in fact, when it really comes down to it, a lot of the chairs that we have in our house, I've had to loan to a client that I'm doing the set of chairs for. So they've got all my chairs around the dining table I had done for them until I get their chairs finished. Now, where are
Okay,
you?
I just wanted to
talking
make
from?
sure it wasn't a lazy boy.
Actually, no, it wasn't, and it's not actually. Yeah. Yeah. And where are you talking from?
Well, I'm sitting on my bed and I'm knitting while I'm watching your program on my big TV
Oh, okay. So
in
what
St.
I'm
Louis.
seeing. Oh, okay. What I'm seeing behind you is water and
It's a
palm
virtual
trees.
background that you can upload.
Oh, that's how disappointing. Yeah. Yeah, you're talking to someone from the frozen north here. So, although it's not frozen at the moment, but will be in a few months. Yeah. Well, that was great fun.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Now, I guess we're kind of scheduled to wind this up, but I do want to point out that this our little adventure actually doesn't finish. If next week, next month, next year, you've got a question, you can get in touch and I'll do what I can to provide whatever it was you were asking about. There may have been something you saw, a book, a thing, a jig, a machine. I'm more than happy to provide that information. Hello?
Well, we appreciate that.
Okay, well, everybody just went black.
We're still here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're still
well,
here.
You are. Okay, good. All right, well, I'm good for questions. There, by the way, is the table saw. I'm, often joking when I'm making fun of the table saw. But in any case, we do have 3 in the workshop, but we never ever rip wood fibers on them. Table saws here are for cutting panels and cutting joinery and so on. That's appropriate on the table saw. The jig I've got you're looking at is the joint for the back legs for the chairs I'm about to make. And so this slides back and forth like so. And here's the pattern. Here's one of the rough bandsawn parts that the back leg is cut from.
Michael, is it simply because you're never making straight cuts that you don't use the table saw? Is there some deeper reason?
No, it's just I find it more efficient to use the bandsaw. For ripping wood fibers, I'm using less material. What am I doing? Right at the moment, I'm doing a whole bunch of solid edging, and the individual pieces are 3/32 of an inch thick. And if I was using the table saw to rip those parts out, I'd be losing a piece of wood with each pass on the table saw. And then the second thing, of course, is that like I am not afraid of table saws at all, but I just don't think they're as efficient for ripping wood fiber as a bandsaw. To rip the stock that we're ripping, which is 2-inch thick hardwood, you kind of need about a 3 horsepower table saw for that. Whereas the bandsaw, if I looked at the motor housing, I think it's probably a 1/3 or maybe a 1/2 horsepower. So there's less energy consumed using the bandsaw for that type of operation versus the table saw. And the other issue is, after 50 years, I've actually never, I've got all my fingers, count them 10. There's not so much as a mark or a scar or anything of that nature. And I think that has something to do with, using the bandsaw, which is inherently safer. There's certainly no danger of kickback on the bandsaw, but it has to be set up properly to perform the way it should.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Do you use a router to smooth the surface after using a bandsaw, or do you just use hand tools?
Well, if I'm doing laminates, my bandsaw is paired with my jointer and my thickness planer, and they're set up in the shop. So if I'm cutting laminates, I'll pick a piece of wood, 2 inches thick. Then I'm jointing my face, running that against the fence on the bandsaw, bandsawing my laminate off, jointing, bandsawing, jointing, bandsawing, and then the laminates all go through the thickness planer. Table saw really does not give you an adequate glue surface for laminating.
Thank you.
Now,
Michael, I'm curious about having 10 or 11 bandsaws. What kind of different setups do you have on the various saws?
well, I admit it's excessive, but here in my shop, I'm always working on at least 4 different projects. And each project will have certain setups and so on. And so if I'm ripping the laminates to a very specific thickness, then the last thing I want to do is move my fence, so I can set up a bandsaw. The other thing is, to make a long story short, we do an awful lot of curved work, as I suspect you noticed. And a lot of those forms are made out of particle board and things like MDF. Particle board's particularly abrasive, and it's invariably has a lot of dirt and junk and metal in it. And so I went out to Home Depot. This is a reason for one of the bandsaws. And I bought the cheapest bandsaw I could find, which happened to be a 14-inch rigid bandsaw. Brought that bandsaw back to the shop, pulled it out of the box, set it up the way that I've set up every bandsaw I've ever worked on anywhere around the world. And that $300 bandsaw from Home Depot is actually dangerous because it's so quiet. If there's any noise going on anywhere, you can't hear that machine running. So what I'm saying here about that is it's all the setup of the bandsaw. It's not how much you paid for it. It's how it's set up. And in the other room, that big Italian bandsaw has that's a 1-inch blade on it. Every bandsaw has the coarsest blade that I can find at that particular width. So that's got a 1 tooth per inch. The 12-inch bandsaw in the corner has a 1/4 inch, and that allows me to cut, I think it's an inch radius on that blade. So that's why that bandsaw is there. I can do super tight radii on it. The big bandsaw I use for resawing monster chunks of wood. The one that is turned on countless times every day is this old 15-inch General that you're looking at right now. That is a brutal machine. It had no sawdust collection. The lower wheel was round, but it wasn't tight to the shaft. I ended up shimming it and so on. But with some TLC, and I bought it in 1974. It's the go-to machine. Over here is this Rikon, which I actually like this, with the exception of the fence, which has to be, they make you use that fence in hell when you're woodworking in hell, by the way. It's just not a easily used fence. And there's, some issues that I've been able to correct. I've made auxiliary fences for it. I mean, if you're cutting a piece of wood 1 3/4 square, you've got to have the upper guide up so high. It's flat out dangerous is what it comes down to. So, by putting on my own auxiliary fences here that just clip in, and then they hang on the machine on a bolt I installed on the back. So I actually teach a 2-evening virtual class on setting up and using the bandsaw. And I've done that twice in the past while for a school in Florida. So at the end of it, which is kind of fun virtually, because as I'm going through the process of setting up the bandsaw, everybody's doing it at home. So they're working on their machine rather than, taking a class where you're using a school machine. We're going through setting up everybody's machine in real time. Any other questions anyone has? Here's my just pile of parts here, by the way. these will be chairs in the not too distant future. And all those parts, there's a lot of parts here. There's enough actually for 10 chairs. They're all roughed out at this point. And this is all sawn surface right off the bandsaw. So what I'm doing is letting this wood acclimatize until it stabilizes, and it's very close now. I can start working away on those chairs. One of the bandsaws that I haven't mentioned actually is outside. It's a bandsaw mill, but and it was not an expensive mill. The whole mill right out of the box was under $3,000. The cut's 24 inches wide, 17 feet long, and that's actually how we cut our veneer now. I've got that sawmill set up exactly the same way my bandsaws are set up in the shop, but we're cutting veneer on the bandsaw 3/32 of an inch thick to the width of the machine, which is 24 inches by whatever length we need. So this is the, there's a big panel saw here, by the way, which I can't remember the last time I turned it on, but there's a vertical panel saw here, an old Speedy Cut, I think. So I break up my sheet goods there and then move them over to the table saw where they're cut, to whatever level of accuracy I need. This is that Centauro right here. This I bought for 150 bucks, and it had been outdoors, and I'm not talking out, under a shed. This was outdoors. It had been abandoned, and as near as they could tell, it had been outside for 20 years. So you can imagine the rust on the table. But in any case, I was able to rebuild it. Been hit a couple of times by forklifts and the rest of it. But I've tuned it up the way I've tuned up every bandsaw, and it works absolutely perfectly. And I didn't show you, and I can just give you a quick glimpse. So there's my 14-inch rigid here that we use for cutting particle board forms and so on. But over on the far side is a 10-inch Ryobi plastic bandsaw. And we often make our own hardware. Brass, not stainless steel, brass and aluminum and so on, catches, this, that, and the other thing. And we're using that Ryobi plastic benchtop bandsaw to do that. And it works incredibly well. So I'm, making my own hinges, you name it. And it's set up exactly the same way as that 24-inch Italian Centauro bandsaw. Same process. So this machine doesn't even come with a fence. I've got pinch clamps. So we might be cutting strips of brass for some sort of catch or something, and it's done on this this little bandsaw. And right here is a 1930s General bandsaw.
Don Turner, why don't you ask your question?
Right, 1 second, my inch.
I think Don might be having trouble with the mute. So Michael, Don Turner asks, what moisture content do you typically work with and what content do you get down to in the shop?
I have my own sawmill. Wood here, when left outdoors, it'll be very similar to where you are. In the winter, the moisture content of wood outdoors drops down to 14%. In the summer, it'll go to 16%. So it sort of fluctuates up and down. I bring it into the workshop and rough mill my parts to, sort of within a quarter of an inch of the finished dimension is what it amounts to, width and thickness and so on. And then I weigh my parts. So, if I'm well, the chair parts I've got in the other room, I've identified a number of them around within the pile, and I pull them out and weigh them. And when the parts no longer lose moisture, they might lose, 5 or 6 grams every 3 days. And then in a few weeks, they start to lose maybe only 3 grams every 3 days. And then a few more weeks after that, they might lose a gram every 3 days. So here you go, whether you can see that or not. There's my numbers here on that one part. So I measured it on the 12th of June at 6:26. On that would be July 1st, it was 6:24, and all that time I lost 2 grams. So if I measured them today, which is 2 weeks later, I know at this point it'll be 6:24. So that piece is now not going to lose any more moisture. So it'll be down in the 7-8% moisture content here in my workshop. And so at that point, I'm completely confident in cutting all my joints and so on.
Michael, how do you control the moisture in your shop?
By sheer volume of wood. Yeah, there's enough wood in here that it basically stays very similar, is what it between winter and summer. But the chairs I'm doing are in elm. I'm actually doing some for me in elm, and I'm doing the chairs in cherry for the client. But I don't know if you can see it, but in any case, that big pile of wood is right underneath a fan. So the air is washed down over the parts and is drawing the moisture out.
Michael, when you apply your clear finish, are you using a spraying system or hand application? Could you address that?
Well, on chairs, I really like to do a hand-applied oil finish because, the chairs are bumping into one another. They're bumping into the table legs and so on. So I'll do the base of the table with a hand-applied oil, which is super labor-intensive, by the way. But the tabletops, invariably, I'm using a catalyzed spray finish. And I'm using a product called by Chemcraft. It's a catalyzed lacquer. And my spray system is a Fuji, I know this. Platinum Q5. And I really like that finish. I've been using catalyzed lacquers for seems like ever. And recently I got a phone call from a client they had a visitor in a wheelchair, and it clipped, the wheelchair clipped off a detail on the base of the dining table. And they asked if I would come over and repair that. And as I'm driving there, I'm thinking, oh God, I'm going to get there and they're going to ask me to repair scratches and so on. And I got there and it looked like I had done it, you know, like last month. And the table was 27 years old. Excellent finish. Any other questions?
Michael, it doesn't sound like there are any other questions. This is Bill Schuchat again.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the one who arranged for you to make
Oh,
this
great.
presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think I can speak for everyone who attended. Your presentation was just outstanding. We want to thank you so much. You certainly do some things that are beyond my skill level, and I think I do some decent work, but
Okay.
I'm really impressed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm having a good time doing it.
That's the way to go.
Yeah. I think it's from any perspective, whether you're doing this full time or you're doing it as a, committed hobbyist and so on, I think it's like the perfect pursuit. And it's even more perfect in the middle of this whole situation we found ourselves in. Kind of getting quarantined and, like, wow, I'm quarantined in a woodwork shop. Yippee. Really quite amazing. I've been, scheduled, I was teaching in New Zealand, and then just as my assignment finished, this whole COVID-19 thing kind of washed over us because I was to go from New Zealand to teach in Japan for 3 weeks, then fly home. I'd be home for 2 days from Japan to Toronto, and then jump on a plane and teach in Brazil for 2 weeks. And of course, both those have, kind of evaporated. And something that you might be interested in is, I'll be teaching at Mark Adams School again next year, and there's generally 5 or 6 different weeks that I'm there. But I'm also teaching in Florida, in Tampa, next April. And as soon as we recover, emerge from our COVID-19 nightmare, I'll be teaching at a new school in Puerto Rico. And if any of those assignments are of interest, get in touch, and I can give you dates and contact information. And then I'm teaching again, and I can teach in New Zealand. I'll be doing another artist in residency January, February, and March in 2022. And 2021, and I'm teaching in Australia again, in Canberra, the capital. So, yeah, in addition to working for absolutely incredible clients and beautiful homes everywhere, I get to travel the world to teach.
Pretty good gig.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, well, thank you so much for the request. I've really enjoyed talking about chair design. It's one of my favorite topics, and of course, I managed to do a segue into my other favorite topic, which of course is the using the bandsaw. So thank you for the opportunity to do both of those. Okay.
Once again, thank you. We appreciate
Okay.
everything you've done.
Okay. Thank you. And like
Thank
I
you
said,
very much, Michael.
You're welcome. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if we get a chance to work face to face somewhere, whether it's Indiana, Florida, Phoenix, Arizona, or Puerto Rico, let's do that.
Will do.
Okay. So I'll just sign off
Take
here.
care and be safe.
Yeah, you same to the whole group.
Thank you all.
Thanks
All right.
again.
Bye.